September the 11th, 2001. The day of the 21st century. That changed not only America, but the entire world forever. On one side stood the world's most powerful superpower, the United States. On the other side, a single name, Osama bin Laden, later labeled as the world's most dangerous terrorist. This was not just the story of two buildings collapsing. It was about power, fear, and politics, and the beginning of a war that transformed the lives of millions of Muslims across the globe. Before that day, America was considered invincible. The Soviet Union had collapsed. China had not yet risen. And there was no force in the world capable of challenging the United States. But then, an ordinary day, 19 men, for passenger planes, and a plan that changed the course of history forever. This is the story of 9/11, a reality the world can never forget.
Welcome to USA Reality Channel. Here we explore the world's biggest events, global politics, and the real stories hidden behind superpowers, all backed by facts and deep research. You're watching USA Reality Channel, where we decode those moments in history that are not just news, but events that change the future of the entire world. Like, share, and subscribe to USA Reality Channel so you don't miss the real stories behind the world's biggest events. And don't forget to press the bell icon so you receive every new video first. Now, let's return to our topic. 9/11 was the biggest news event of the 21st century. A single day changed the lives of Muslims across the world forever. On one side was the world's greatest superpower, the United States, and on the other side was one man, Osama bin Laden, who was considered the terrorist responsible for this incident. This was not the first time someone had tried to bring down America's Twin Towers, because at that time these towers were among the tallest buildings in the world. Without any doubt, they were also among the most famous buildings globally, as nearly 500 Hollywood movies had been filmed inside and around them. Whoever wanted to destroy these buildings knew very well that if the World Trade Center towers fell in New York, it would become the biggest news story in the world. Just like today, if someone were to bring down the Burj Khalifa, it would have a massive global impact. 23 years ago, the global situation was such that the Soviet Union had collapsed and China was not yet very powerful. The United States was the world's only and greatest superpower, with no one capable of challenging its strength. But suddenly, on an ordinary day, September 11th, 2001, 19 individuals arrived at different airports to hijack 4 major American airplanes. According to All American reports, all 19 of them were Muslims, and they belonged to Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Lebanon, and the UAE. Teams of 5 people were formed to hijack each plane. Every individual had a very important role, and they had been receiving training for many months. Eventually, all 4 planes departed from their airports, and as soon as they took off, the hijackers began to put their plan into action. According to the plan, just 15 minutes after being airborne, the 5 hijackers on the first plane took control of the entire aircraft using small knives and box cutters. They killed both pilots, seated Mohammed Atta in the pilot's seat, and pushed the remaining passengers toward the back of the plane. They clearly announced that both pilots were dead and that from now on, only their man Mohammed Atta would fly the aircraft. After hearing this, all the passengers fell silent. However, the hijackers never intended to land the plane. While Mohammed Atta was explaining all this to the passengers, he accidentally pressed another button, which connected the aircraft to the New York Airport control tower. He said, "Everyone stay calm. We are taking the plane toward the airport." Hearing this, chaos spread at the New York airport, and the runway was immediately cleared to make space for the incoming aircraft. After that, Mohammed Atta reconnected with the control tower and changed the plane's direction. The flight was originally going from Boston to Los Angeles, which was a long journey, but Mohammed Atta turned the plane 100 degrees and redirected it toward New York. As the plane approached New York City, it began descending rapidly, making everyone believe that it was coming down to land at the New York airport. Because of this, people at the airport were also waiting for the plane's arrival. Everyone assumed that the plane was descending in order to land at New York's airport. That is why people at the airport were also waiting for the aircraft. But even after a long time passed, the plane did not arrive, and confusion spread throughout the airport about where it had gone. Eventually, someone came and informed them that the plane had crashed into the World Trade Center building. At that moment, only airport officials knew what had actually happened. The American media had no clear information, so every news channel began broadcasting it as a major accident. During all this, US President George Bush was sitting in a children's school in Florida. His secretary quietly came over and informed him about the incident. His first reaction was that it must have been an accident. The first plane had been hijacked just 15 minutes after takeoff. About 30 minutes later, the second plane was also hijacked, and these timings were part of a pre-planned strategy. Whoever was behind these attacks wanted the world to witness the second crash live. Marwan al-Shayhi, who was only 23 years old, hijacked the second plane along with his accomplices, sat in the pilot's seat, and turned the aircraft toward New York instead of Los Angeles. At the very moment when news channels around the world had interrupted their regular programming and were calling the first crash a tragic accident, the second plane arrived at full speed and crashed into the second tower of the World Trade Center. At first, people were confused, but gradually everyone realized that this was not an accident. It was an attack. The president's secretary again leaned in and whispered, "Mr. President, America is under attack." After that, the US military was put on full high alert, and all aircraft across the country were ordered to land immediately. However, there were still two planes that had already been hijacked, and no one knew what their next targets would be. The third plane, flown by a Saudi national named Hani Hanjour, was diverted toward Washington, D.C. instead of New York. As it approached Washington, the pilot brought the plane very low and increased its speed to the maximum. The aircraft was heading toward one of the most important buildings in the world, the Pentagon, home to the world's #1 intelligence agency, the CIA. After the plane crashed into the Pentagon, news channels shifted their focus from the World Trade Center to footage of the Pentagon. But one plane was still missing. When the US military checked its direction, they discovered that it was also heading toward Washington and could possibly target Parliament or the Capitol building. Under extreme pressure, on the orders of the US Vice President, 2 fighter jets were scrambled and instructed to shoot the plane down at all costs, even if all the passengers were killed. 3 planes had reached their targets exactly according to plan. But the 4th plane, flown by Ziad Jarrah, never reached its intended target, the Capitol. By the time this plane was hijacked, the World Trade Center had already been attacked. Ziad Jarrah again told the passengers, "Everyone stay calm. We are heading to the airport." But when one passenger used the plane's phone to contact his wife, she told him that the hijackers were lying. They were not going to an airport. This was a suicide mission. That passenger informed the others, "We are going to die anyway. But before these hijackers crash the plane into a building, we should bring it down ourselves." All the passengers then united and attacked the hijackers. Ziad Jarrah began violently shaking the plane up and down and side to side. But eventually the passengers reached the cockpit door. Just as they were about to break it down, Ziad Jarrah pushed the plane to full speed and plunged it toward the ground. And in this way, the 4th and final plane was destroyed.
Even 100 days after the 9/11 attacks, New York was still covered in dust everywhere, and it cost nearly $1 billion to clear the debris of the destroyed buildings. However, the real damage to the United States was not caused by the collapse of the World Trade Center itself. The real damage happened in another building located a short distance away, a place many people often forget, the New York Stock Exchange. After the attacks, panic spread across American markets, and the stock exchange began to crash. Stock markets around the world started falling. One of the biggest losses was suffered by Warren Buffett's company, Berkshire Hathaway. It is said that these attacks caused nearly $1.4 trillion in economic losses to the United States. America's GDP growth, which had been rising at 4 to 5%, dropped to below 1% after the 2001 attacks. While the shares of most companies were falling, the stocks of some companies were rising, and those companies were war corporations, weapons manufacturers, fighter jet makers, and tank-producing companies. Almost all American investors began putting their money into these companies, because everyone knew that the United States was about to launch a major war in response to 9/11. The eyes of the world were now fixed on US President George W. Bush, wondering who had dared to challenge the world's most powerful nation and why. A few days later, George Bush addressed the world and said that these attacks were not carried out by any country or government, but were terrorist attacks. According to him, there was only one organization behind them, Al-Qaeda, led by Osama bin Laden, who at that time was living comfortably in Afghanistan. Now the entire world was blaming Osama bin Laden for the attacks, but Osama bin Laden gave an interview to Al Jazeera, in which he said, "I have nothing to do with these attacks." However, he also made some other statements that created confusion worldwide, leaving people unsure whether he was responsible or not. After the attacks, not only Osama bin Laden, but Muslims and Islamic scholars across the world strongly condemned the incident. Because anyone who has studied the life of the Prophet Muhammad knows that before any war, he always instructed Muslims: do not harm women. Do not harm children. Do not harm the elderly. Do not destroy trees or crops. Do not harm people of other religions. Fight only those who fight you. How could such attacks be carried out in the name of the religion of a prophet who was known for mercy, forgiveness, and compassion? That is why, after the attacks, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, OIC, the largest Muslim organization in the world, also condemned the 9/11 attacks. The Grand Mufti of Makkah also issued a statement declaring that these attacks were against Islam. Even Ayatollah Khamenei, who is considered an enemy of the United States, stated that these attacks had nothing to do with Islam. Despite all this, the image of Islam in Western countries began to deteriorate, and Islamophobia started to rise. For example, women wearing hijab were attacked on the streets. Many Muslims were fired from their jobs. Some even lost their lives. For the first time, television debates began questioning whether Islam was truly a peaceful religion or not. Islam is a religion of peace, and despite everything, Muslims around the world believed that whoever carried out these attacks, they stood firmly against them. Even after Osama bin Laden denied involvement, the United States continued to place all the blame on him. The US government issued an ultimatum to the Afghan government, the Taliban, demanding that all Al-Qaeda leaders, including Osama bin Laden, be handed over to the United States at any cost. Afghanistan refused to hand over Osama bin Laden to the United States because only a few years earlier, Afghanistan had defeated a major superpower, the Soviet Union, after a 10-year war. During that war, Osama bin Laden had played a significant role in supporting the Afghan Mujahideen. Because of this, the Taliban government, led by Mullah Mohammed Omar, held Osama bin Laden in high respect. The Taliban told the United States, "The man you are accusing does not even admit that he carried out these attacks. Give us proof, and we will punish him ourselves. Without evidence, we cannot hand over our guest to anyone." But the United States rejected this offer and replied, "I am a superpower, and you are a poor country. I have no need to provide you with any evidence. Hand this man over to us, or we will attack Afghanistan and eliminate the Taliban." American generals had already completed their research and believed that the Taliban would be able to resist US forces for only a few weeks, after which they would be completely defeated. But the Taliban, being Pashtun, refused to bow to pressure. As a result, the United States began preparing for an invasion of Afghanistan. In a final attempt to prevent war, the Taliban made another proposal to the US government. "We are willing to hand Osama bin Laden over to a third country, one that listens to neither you nor us, so that it can make an independent decision." But intoxicated by its power, the United States rejected this offer as well. And just 1 month after the 9th of November, America launched its attack on Afghanistan. President George W. Bush described this war as a crusade and named it the War on Terror. From all directions, US forces were deployed toward Afghanistan. America provided full military support to Ahmed Shah Massoud's forces, the strongest Afghan group opposing the Taliban. According to America's plan, the Taliban government was removed and Afghanistan was brought under US control. However, during all of this, one major obstacle stood in America's way: the media, especially Al Jazeera. While most global media outlets were showing only the American narrative, Al Jazeera was the only channel presenting both sides, the American side and the Afghan civilian side. Al Jazeera broadcast footage showing American jets targeting not only Taliban fighters, but also ordinary civilians, footage that channels like BBC and CNN were not showing. This deeply angered the US military. Just 4 weeks after the invasion, Al Jazeera's headquarters in Kabul was bombed, in an attempt to stop its reporting. Some of its cameramen were even sent to the world's most notorious prison, Guantanamo Bay, to silence the network completely. The American general's planning initially appeared successful. Within just 3 months of 9/11, the Taliban government collapsed. With no strong Afghan leader remaining, the United States began searching for a new leader for Afghanistan. A major conference was held in Bonn, Germany, where Afghan leaders were brought together to select a new ruler for the country. That leader was Hamid Karzai. He was the complete opposite of the Taliban, Western-oriented, polished in appearance, and a favorite of the CIA. The United States installed Hamid Karzai as president of Afghanistan. To strengthen his rule, a new army was trained and a new government structure was established. Toppling governments and installing leaders of its own choosing has long been America's business. But history shows that the Afghan people have never accepted leaders imposed from outside. On top of that, Hamid Karzai's government was so deeply corrupt that the Afghan nation could never truly accept it. It appeared that the Taliban had lost the war. But just 2 years later, in 2003, the United States launched yet another war, the Iraq War. With a declaration: Saddam Hussein must leave Iraq within 48 hours. And with that, America's full attention shifted away from Afghanistan toward Iraq, where a massive false justification was created to remove Saddam Hussein. It is often claimed that the Abbottabad operation was a major game or conspiracy, but this belief is completely incorrect. Because just a few days after the Abbottabad operation, Al-Qaeda officially accepted Osama bin Laden's death on its secret websites and declared that they would definitely take revenge. After that, the Taliban also acknowledged his death, and even Osama bin Laden's own son, Hamza bin Laden, confirmed it. So when both the United States and Al-Qaeda agree that Osama bin Laden was killed, why do some Pakistanis still question it? Osama bin Laden had 5 wives and 11 sons. His eldest son, Abdullah bin Laden, still quietly runs his business in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, although every movement of his is closely monitored by the Saudi government. Osama bin Laden's second son, Omar bin Laden, has openly declared his father and his mission to be wrong, and he has even written a book against his father. His third son, Saad bin Laden, was once considered Osama's right-hand man. Osama wanted to make him the future leader of Al-Qaeda, but Saad bin Laden was killed in 2009, before Osama himself was killed. Only one of his sons appeared prominently in Al-Qaeda after Osama's death, his fourth son, Hamza bin Laden. After Osama's death, Hamza repeatedly released public statements on behalf of Al-Qaeda, but he too was killed in Afghanistan between 2018 and 2019. The members of Osama bin Laden's family who survived in Abbottabad were first kept in Pakistani custody for 1 to 2 years, after which they were sent back to their respective countries. Today, they are living quietly in Saudi Arabia and Yemen, but their exact locations remain unknown. After Osama bin Laden's death, many personal documents were recovered from his house, including audio recordings and even video games meant for his children. These documents suggest that Osama bin Laden already knew that one day he would be killed suddenly. Among these documents was also his final will, in which he wrote, "I still possess $40 million. After my death, a small portion should be given to my family, and the rest must be given to Al-Qaeda." Now the question arises. When Osama bin Laden had already been killed, and the purpose for which America came to Afghanistan had been fulfilled, the United States should have left Afghanistan and returned home. But America did not do so. Instead, it remained in Afghanistan for the next 10 years. Because Osama bin Laden was no longer the issue, the world had changed. Very close to Afghanistan, a new superpower, China, was emerging, and to contain China, America considered its presence in this region necessary. In addition, shortly before Osama bin Laden's death, a US institute conducted research in Afghanistan and discovered that the minerals beneath Afghan soil are among the world's most valuable and rare resources. The most important among them is lithium, which is used to produce nearly all batteries in the world. If the United States had left Afghanistan, China could have easily gained access to these minerals. That is why America remained in Afghanistan for another decade. Yet despite having such a massive army and immense power, the Taliban's presence continued to grow. Eventually, after 20 years of war, the new US President Donald Trump made a deal with the Taliban and began withdrawing American forces gradually. Surprisingly, even after 20 years of training, the Afghan army could not stand against the Taliban for even a few days. Just days after the US withdrawal, the Taliban entered Kabul once again, without any major fighting, after 20 years. The Afghan war is considered America's greatest failure, because instead of weakening the Taliban, 20 years of war only made them stronger. After this war, Afghanistan once again earned its old title, the Graveyard of Empires. Since the deaths of 3,000 Americans in the 9/11 attacks, the war on terror has resulted in 4.6 million people killed, 40 million people displaced and turned into refugees. The narrator states that he himself became a refugee in 2009 along with his family and entire city, despite having no connection to 9/11. If the cost of the war on terror is examined, $2 trillion were spent directly. According to Brown University estimates, the total cost has reached $8 trillion. This war caused suffering to the American people, the Afghan people, and the only ones who truly benefited were weapons manufacturing companies. For example, the CEO of Lockheed Martin, who earned only a few $1 million annually before the war, saw his income rise to $30 million per year during the war. An increase of 10 times in just a few years. And even today, this cycle continues.